Hello and welcome to another episode of the Embodied Union podcast. I'm Lindsey.
I am Charlie.
And today we're going to be talking all things intimacy.
Arousal, desire, turn on.
What's our story?
Well, that's a good idea. We can start with our experience and our story with it, because mine has not always been so fantastic. I struggled my whole life. Like, I lost my virginity. That's not a great story. Not even really sure. Like, alcohol's involved, and that really set the tone for me. I had no idea that my body was sacred. My pleasure was sacred. I didn't know pleasure was for me. I just never had a good experience of sex and intimacy and lovemaking until my 30s. So I struggled with all of this.
I remember you telling me a story once around like doing some type of like pleasure practice and then your partner being quiet.
So my very, very first boyfriend, and I'd never orgasmed before, and him and I had been together probably a couple of months and doing all the things, and I had not reached orgasm. And at that point I wasn't faking orgasms, because I was just like, how do I get to orgasm? I was curious about it. And he was at work and I put porn on. Back then we were watching porn, and I was self-pleasuring to porn, and also I had a mirror in front of me. So I was like watching myself while watching porn. So I was very engaged, like visually, which now I know is actually really helpful. Like, I wasn't distracted, I was really present. I could see myself, I could see the fantasy, the porn, and I was stimulating myself. And I had my very, very first ever clitoral orgasm. And I was so freaking excited. And I messaged him, and I was like, guess what happened? Guess what I did? Guess what happened? And he shamed me. He shamed me for it. He immediately was triggered. Now, in hindsight, he was insecure that it had been outside of him, that I'd done it myself, that it hadn't, that he just wasn't involved. And so he shamed me for it. And I remember before that, I used to feel my libido and turn on, like in the mornings I'd wake up next to my partner and I would feel horny, and I would kind of like back myself against him. I didn't know how to really engage, but I remember feeling like just desire in my body. And then from that moment, like I struggled with my libido for then the next decade. So it just really shut down a little part of me. Like, I had done something wrong. It just wasn't okay. That my pleasure it's not about me. It's just, I think it shut a little part of me down. Yeah.
And I guess my story around pleasure was that I kind of grew up in a pretty like sex positive family household, and it was kind of definitely not frowned upon and those sorts of things. And I don't know exactly how it happened, but I definitely remember having a bit of a self-pleasure practice from the age of 10. So I was
What do you mean?
I was an early bloomer. I had a really I've never shared this before, actually. It just came into my mind. There was actually a kid in grade 4, so we're 10, that we used to have reading time in class, and he used to self-pleasure in class.
Like, he'd get it out.
Kind of hide it under the desk. And I remember seeing that and just going, what is going on? Like, I knew what was happening, but I'd never done it myself. And I think that might have actually I'm going to try that.
At 10 is such a baby, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I won't mention any names because I actually remember who it was. But it was more that that self-pleasure became something of it didn't feel like, I had the opposite. It didn't feel shameful. It felt exploratory and what happens here and what does this feel like? And, having lots of desire and no actual way to, at that age, being such a young guy, I remember having the opportunity to lose my virginity when I was 14, and then it didn't happen, and then I did at 16. So
how was that, first experience for you?
It was terrifying. First time was
performance anxiety?
Yeah, all of that. I remember when I was 14, I was trying to put the condom on, and I actually orgasmed trying to put the condom on. I was just so nervous. Yeah. And I just always remember having the experience of like the first time I engaged with somebody, I usually couldn't get it up because I'd be just too nervous, too much anxiety, and not knowing that it's anxiety, but just knowing that my body is actually, now that I'm like a somatic psychotherapist now, so all it is that I'm in a state of fear and in overwhelm and fear, and of course my body is not responding because it doesn't feel safe.
Yeah.
And now I know a lot more, but it's like, that's actually what was missing, just the feeling of vulnerability and safety at the time.
So important. It really is. Like, I know for myself now, being able to be vulnerable and safe is what leads me into the deepest pleasure that I've experienced. And just knowing, like, with my experience, poor virginity loss story, feeling shamed, and then just never feeling safe around sex, never feeling like didn't really know how to be vulnerable. Like, no one was teaching me. There was no sex ed, there was nothing. Like, I love what we teach couples, and I wish it had been available. I wish it was available sooner, like more tantric education around just safety in the body and what's needed, especially for a woman, to really go to the depths of her pleasure, like safety. And I just didn't know, I didn't have a reference for that, again, until my 30s. And so still having sex from 17 onwards, over and over and over again, but without the foundation of safety, over a decade and more, just getting a lot of freeze in my body, creating lots of shutdown, lots of freeze, lots of contraction, because there was no safety. So my body was kind of like, essentially I'm like raping my own body if there's not the element of safety. So eventually just completely shut down.
Well, I guess at the time too, was it an experience of, not that you were doing that to yourself consciously, but it was like, my body's not working, or like, or I just don't feel like it at all, like maybe I'm just not into it?
Well, because I was crossing my own body boundary, crossing my body's boundary over and over created such a no in my body. But because I didn't have any reference for what sex could be like, I didn't understand that, like, all I felt was like, oh, like I'm not turned on, or like I'm not wet, or I don't feel horny, or I'm just like, penetration is painful. And I made that mean that I must be broken. Because I had friends who were having sex and talking about the orgasms they were having, and I used to think that like they were just lying to me. I was like, you can't, like, penetration is terrible. Like, it's actually this terrible experience. Like, what do you mean? Like, I couldn't understand. I had no reference for it being pleasurable or safe or for me, but I just continued to do it because I thought it was a me problem, and I still wanted to be in connection.
Yeah.
So I think straight out the gate, having such a shit like experience of losing my virginity and sex not being pleasurable, having no reference for it being any different, it's no wonder that I internalized that as well. I must be broken, I must be wrong, because everyone else is doing it, and my partner still wants to be doing it with me, and like he can reach orgasm, and it's just like, I just got to keep trying, I just got to keep showing up. And does that make sense?
It totally does. And it's, you know, I'm sure it's not the only story, like, you know, you're not the only one.
I work with so many women who, again, like, I don't know if it's our generation, but just around 16, 17, losing our virginity, alcohol's involved, and then just going into this season of like casual sex, and utilizing sex to have attention and connection, to feel wanted, to feel desired, to feel like you're doing what everyone else is doing. And so I work with a lot of women who are in their 30s and their 40s in long-term committed relationships who have over time built so much no and resentment in their body from crossing their own boundaries, and they're now at this place of like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I got to that place, I can't do this anymore, about 5 or 6 years ago. And then that was a big journey of like healing that in my body. But yeah, I get a lot of women who are like, they're at that point of like, the no is so loud, and now what do I do?
Yeah. And I think my experience, or maybe not my experience, but the work that I do and hear with so many men is like, they get so into the rut of going for more, bigger, faster, harder pleasure, that there kind of becomes this desensitization, and there's such a mismatch with that. So if a man is predominantly using porn for self-pleasure and he's using it in a way that's straight to orgasm, like there's no exploration, there's no curiosity, it's just wham bam, thank you, you know, it's over. And then when he goes to be engaged with his partner, there's no sensitivity there. There's like a need and there's a desire to have it be at the same intensity as porn is, and for him as around like how much friction there is and those sorts of things. And it leads to like a lot of dysfunction for both, because it's like the woman's not being met, you know, and the man doesn't feel like he's being met because he doesn't know it can be any other way, you know, because he's conditioned himself. And it sounds like there's just like on both sides, there's just lots of conditioning in our society where it's not really working, it's not fully functioning.
And like what I think, because men can reach orgasm a little bit easier because it supports the species, like biologically for them to come, like I think that they'll still go for what they know, because it does still reach that peak moment of like a blip of pleasure. But I think because men and women, when they're coming from this more mainstream way of like friction-based, fantasy-based, porn-based style of lovemaking, it's not hitting the mark. So it creates this almost like a neediness, like, well, we'll just have more. We just need to have more of it. Like when I work with couples, often if there's a mismatch in desire, how it can present is the woman is feeling unmet, so she starts like withdrawing from intimacy, whereas the man is also, it's not quite hitting the mark, but he's trying to chase more. So we've got one partner kind of pulling back from intimacy while one is just trying to lean in harder. But I think even though they look like different behaviors, opposite behaviors, I think the root of it is still that the lovemaking that is happening it's not it.
It's definitely not it.
What I know from now having sex and lovemaking be so deeply satisfying, it's not actually that I need more of it. It's like when we have it, it's like, this deep sense of like, I'm satisfied. What I can liken it to is like when you're a raw vegan and you keep eating and you can eat more because you're not getting as many calories, but it doesn't matter how much you eat. It's actually not that satisfying. And then coming back to eating meat, that first time that you have a steak, it's like, oh, I'm done. I'm good now. I can settle, I can sleep. And like, you don't need to overeat. You're just like satiated. That's like good intimacy is satiating.
Yeah, I would agree. And, you know, trying to teach men that around nourishment and taking it in, it's like you can actually, if you're sensitive, you can actually absorb and take in much more intimacy with less. So it's actually like a really great practice of like noticing all the ways in which we are being intimate, or we are making sort of like hashtag making, or in brackets, making love with each other. That it's like, oh, there's all these moments in the day where we're connecting, and because it's not penetration, it's like it doesn't count, but it so does, because all those parts add up.
So even, are you saying not even like, I guess men and women, if we could learn to be present with the moments of nourishment and pleasure that are happening all the time, it kind of combats that problem of like neediness. I need this one specific thing. It's like, I really resonate with this. Like if I am in the practice of cultivating pleasure in my day to day through like sunshine or touch, whatever it is, then I feel good, you know, like there's no attachment to needing more and more. It's just like letting the nourishment in. I really like that.
Yeah, because I think like I kind of liken it the same to food. It's overfed, undernourished. It's like having sex that isn't quite hitting the mark. It's like more's not better, you know. And it's not that we need to spice things up, because I think usually that's where most couples get to, is like, oh, I need to be learning some new technique, or if my cock was 5 inches longer, it would be somehow better, or whatever it is. I've got to buy this outfit or this toy or whatever, then it's gonna make it better. And it's lacking the vital ingredient in relationship, which is actually just authentic connection.
So true. Like novelty can be fun, but it's a band-aid. You know, like good sex, good lovemaking, good intimacy, it's not about technique or any specific movement or doing. Like we can be close to dead still. But if we're really present with each other, then we're able to tune into the subtle sensitivity, and there is ecstasy in the subtle sensitivity, but the subtle sensitivity and the energetic sensitivity isn't available if we're going for big sensation and seeking things that are actually external. You know, like a vibrator, it's external, the outfit's external, watching porn, it's external to me. It takes me away from my body. So when we're not focused on what are we doing, it's how are we being.
Yes.
And that's why if the key ingredient for me is presence. And our lovemaking is sensational on the days that I'm present. And it's like the days that I'm not present, it's like I see the difference. It's worlds apart.
Yeah, and I think when two people are in attunement with each other, it's like the ecstasy that can happen together is that collaboration, that energy togetherness is what really sets it apart. It's the way that couples can move together and sort of know each other and be in the bliss. It's like you really are experiencing your partner through yourself. And that's what you're speaking to, is like the more present you are of experiencing yourself while you're experiencing me, is then like there's reciprocity in that. It's like likewise. It's like my ability to feel my body and my sensitivity and be present in my own body allows me to be very highly attuned to noticing what yours is doing. And then that's the dance.
And that is extremely healing. As a woman who has had a lot of contraction and freeze and no and crossing my boundary and all that in the past, having a partner now who is so attuned to me, I feel so safe because I know that you can feel the subtle shifts that happen if my yes goes into a no. And you never try to keep going on top of, it's like, let's change the position, let's take a break for a moment, let's stop. Like in the past, I would cross my boundary of no all the time. It's like, especially if we've already started, we're doing this, it's like, I'll just keep going. Maybe they can finish and then we can be done. But it's like, I can't pull that off with you, which creates so much reassurance and safety in me that I'm never going to be taken from in our lovemaking. Like my intention is to be really honoring myself, but knowing that old pattern of behavior is there. I'm just so grateful that you can catch it because you are so committed to being present with me.
Yeah, and I think that is like a skill that I think all men can learn, is around this, like the masculine being like the direct, the present, the intense, the focused, and the woman being like the always feeling it all, timeless, everything all at once, always. It makes sense that a woman will fall in and out of presence when it comes to intimacy because so much is happening for her. You know, I think as men, we can get really like locked in to what's happening and it to, you know, whatever it might be. Like we get a bit of tunnel vision where it's like, this is happening and it's not stopping now. But it's like, the truth of it is that it's, for a woman, I don't think arousal works linearly like that. It doesn't just keep going. It's like nearly every single time that we have intimacy, at some point I feel it change and shift. Like it's, you know, and I think if the men are listening to this, it's like, can you really be in the attunement with your partner, knowing that at some point in your session, there's going to be a dip in arousal or a dip in focus, and instead of taking it personally and making it something about you, it's like, can you shift the mood? Can you stop? Can you be still? Can you create some change? Like stopping doesn't mean it's over. It's like stopping just means that something else can occur, you know? And like taking a break or doing something different is fine.
And I honestly, what you're saying is like music to my ears, and I'm so glad that I'm in relationship with a man who lives by this. It's such a gift. And I think it's also important to add, if a woman or if my yes does become a no and it doesn't want to shift somewhere else, like that also gets to be okay. Like if that happens, it's such a relief for me in my body that my no is never taken personally. and you never take my no personally. I sometimes can still take my no personally. So my actual practice is not taking my no personally. I think this is a good segue into like responsive and spontaneous desire, because this is quite a new concept that's landed for me, having more responsive desire. And I used to take that personally. So responsive desire is, I don't actually go through my day feeling horny and turned on and like ready for sex. And I could quite easily forget about it. Like I'm quite focused on work and on my business and on my practices, and it really requires interaction with another for my desire to kickstart. So I have responsive desire, whereas there's spontaneous desire.
I want to speak to that,
Yeah.
like, because what was really interesting around that for me, like, and there's some books like Passionate Marriage and a few other bits and pieces where it's like interactive, but it's like even in the evidence for you saying that, oh, I didn't orgasm until I was a certain age, it's like, well, that's a good sign that it's like you probably are responsive because you weren't interacting with anyone else. It wasn't something that just came up for you that you wanted to go and participate in.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of men that have partners that are responsive, is they can blame it on, oh, she's just in her masculine. That's not true.
I'm in my masculine until I'm engaged with.
Exactly. So it's like,
and it's my responsibility
yeah,
to
but
come
it's
into my feminine.
Yeah, but it's also my responsibility to put you in your feminine, you know, and that's a fun
Both
game.
are true.
Yeah, both are fun, right? And I think it's just like, it's just having this a level of sensitivity and awareness when we're in relationship that our partner could be in her masculine, or she could also be responsive, you know, and it's like noticing the subtlety in that. It's just like making you wrong for being like really inspired around your business isn't that you're in your masculine that you're not into sex, you know. And I think a lot of men take this personally, like, oh, my partner never initiates. I wish she would initiate. She's not going to initiate if she's responsive.
That's that's the thing. I have to remind myself that it can be a playful thing for me to initiate, right? But it's not at the forefront of my mind. Like it isn't. Like I love our intimacy, but it's you initiate because you have more spontaneous desire. And what that means is like, I can walk past you in the morning and you can see me and you can be like, oh, it like lights a fire in you. Like your desire can just kick in.
Yes.
From
and it does.
Yeah, it really does. And like that is more spontaneous. And I don't know, this isn't an absolute, but what I do see is that more women are responsive and more men are spontaneous. It's not absolute, definitely not.
Yeah.
But it's like, how can I now, knowing that about myself, how can I not make my mechanics wrong? It's like I spent so long making my body wrong, taking her, like what I thought was just like, I'm broken because I'm just not, just taking my body personally, and actually stop doing that and just allow myself, allow the mechanics of me, just to give myself permission, has actually allowed me to access more desire and more arousal. Because if I'm judging and shaming and criticizing and feeling like I'm broken, then that's just putting me in my head and even further away from desire. So knowing that I'm responsive, if I want to have more pleasure in my life, and it's something I do want to feel more of, then it's actually on me to be cultivating pleasure in my day-to-day. And that's what I'm committed to.
And I think that probably ties into a lot around, like, say, if you are spontaneously aroused, it's like you'll see something and you'll think you're visual, like, oh, I'm really visual. It's like, yeah, because that's like you see it and then it's like, boom, fire's lit up. And it can be like quite a thing of, I see something multiple times a day, or I'm thinking about it and it pops into my mind as an intrusive thought. And it's like, oh, I wonder if my partner's doing that. And then because I'm this way where it's like, what's the word again? I just lost it in my mind. Spontaneous. If I'm spontaneous, that must be then my partner is also spontaneous. So I send them a pic or I message them something and it's like, it doesn't actually land. So sometimes my invitation here, which is, I find invitation quite a like feminine version of leadership, is I might throw the ball to you and it's actually a shit throw. So I'm turned on and I'm like, yeah, and it's not what you're into, or in the moment of you being responsive, it doesn't land. So it's an air ball, and then and this is what I see in partnerships so often is the ball that I used to throw used to land, and now it's not landing. And for so many women, it's like he makes effort, but it's not turning me on. You know, so there's also that to be aware of as well. It's like I take it as, and this might not necessarily be the truth, but it's like, if you're my partner, it's my responsibility to work out what lights you up. That's just, I think, as what we do in relationship. Because I know a guy, he'll fly to another continent to go and chase after the girl that he really wants. So if you're sitting there going, oh, I can't do it, I don't know how, kind of being a little victim about it, it's like, that's not attractive either, bro.
No.
Like, you really got to like nail this part of like figuring out how to turn your partner on. And I got to be honest, a lot of the time it's got nothing to do with sex and everything to do about cleaning up the relationship, which is a big part that I talk about, which is cleaning the glass and relationship house cleaning of like, what's all the water under the bridge that's actually in the way for your partner to be like in love with you. Because if there's stuff in the way, if a woman is thinking about everything all at once, always, it's very hard to engage with her if there's things blocking that. It's so hard. Like, it makes it nearly next to impossible to have your partner be turned on if she's thinking about 1,000 other things that you've done.
And like, often we'll get couples come in the door with the complaint of, well, the intimacy has dropped off, but the communication dropped off months ago, years ago, and that actually is where it all started to erode.
Yeah.
So it's like, we actually have to put the intimacy down, clean up the relationship, and slowly like create space for the intimacy to come back.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, it's a collaboration, you know, like, yes, it's important that a man be committed to like, what's my partner's turn on? How can I take that challenge on? But it's such a collaboration. Like, a woman needs to take responsibility to know her own body and to know her landscape, and to, even if you're in a relationship, be spending time in solo self-pleasure as an act of self-care, so that you are feeling more present and embodied, which gives your partner something to tune into, you know? And like, as someone who is responsive, I've just had to make the commitment to myself that I'm gonna practice. Like, I'm just gonna do it. Like, I used to try and force myself into self-pleasure because I thought it had to look a certain way.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, I don't feel like it. Like, I'm not turned on, so I don't want to. But it's like, you have to reverse engineer it, and it's like, okay, I'm not actually doing this with an agenda. It's just, I do desire to have more pleasure in my own life and in my relationship. So I'm committed to dropping into my body, exploring, like seeing what happens, and just taking the pressure off for it to have to look like anything. And like, that's really helped.
It's a massive thing. And I was going to speak into this collaboration being almost like conversation, and we talked about communication between partners and clearing that, but there's also like the implicit, there's also the body language and the body conversation that's going on as well. So if couples are thinking about the unspoken words or there's things, there's also a tendency to have like body things happening as well. So a lot of our communication is actually non-verbal. So are we giving each other eye contact? Do we enjoy each other's kissing? The way I touch you, do you like it or not? It's like all these other ways. It's like when we're together, I am twice your size, literally. And so for me, it's like, I've got to be really mindful around how much pressure I put on your body when we're engaging in something. So it's like noticing those small things, like big things as well, as far as like how our bodies are interacting, as well as our words and our, you know, our mental cognitive function as well. I think that's...
I agree. Like, I know, like, for me, what really primes me for intimacy is like feeling intellectually connected to you. And part of that is in, when we're having conversation, it's in your eye contact. It's like really feeling your presence through your eyes. Like, there's that for me is just amazing.
And a lot of couples don't.
They don't. They'll they're especially long-term committed relationships, and kids have come along, and there's busyness and work. They might not really be in contact throughout the day, and then it's a couple of words over the kitchen table, but there's never just a sit down, eye to eye, heart to heart. What I love about you. And this is the thing with when couples come to us, the number one objection to fixing their relationship is we don't have time. But if you implemented 5 minutes at the end of every day to sit in yab yum or sit cross-legged or just to look at each other with eye contact, 0 distractions, breathe, sink into your body, and then acknowledge the other, that is going to start to create more intimacy.
Yeah, or even just a longer than an 8-second hug, can be the other thing as well. There's these just really simple things that can happen where it's if you both like each other and are lacking time, like you say, and you were just to hug each other for 30 seconds.
And you be really present with that and slow your breath and be as mindful as possible. That's delicious.
Mate,
and it's simple.
Yeah, if you're not with your partner now, I guarantee if you do that, if you do 2 basic things, which is give them some more eye contact and hold them for a period of time next time you see them.
Doesn't even need words. Maybe there's no words, right? It's
They'll be what's up?
Loving presence.
And they might not touch. They might be oh, that's a bit much. It's hot. It's
might
sweaty.
Feel a bit weird at first, yeah. But it's just knowing that we get the objection of we're too busy. You can create intimacy, gourmet intimacy in 15 minutes, for sure.
And so I think then let's speak around some of the blocks as well, because I'd be assuming that people want to have great relationships and they want to have great sex and they do want to be connected to their arousal. And if arousal is mainly felt in the body, but also the mind is the instigator, I think one of the biggest blocks that's not spoken about enough is just around fear and not really understanding how fear can play out. It could be fear of the experience, and I know I'll speak for men, is there's a lot of performance anxiety, which is a version of fear, because it's the onus is on us to initiate, create the environment, lead the intimacy practice. It's all the pre-work. And I think for a lot of us who don't acknowledge how sensitive we are, we're actually just waiting to get rejected. It's just I think a lot of men are hurt, or have been hurt and have evidence that when they do initiate, it doesn't go well. So they're almost half-assing it. It's well, I'm just going to actually just do what works. And that's when the spontaneity and the fun and the play sort of drops out of it pretty fast, to just be well, I've got to strategically wait for the right moment, or I've got to have enough covert contracts where I'm well, I did this and I did that and I've asked now and I deserve it. And it's it's very much tit for tat. So there's no vulnerability. It's the big piece that I see is misunderstanding of how fear impacts intimacy and pleasure, and just a serious lack of vulnerability for it. What do you think?
Well, as you're speaking, if you're kind of speaking as the big fear for men is around rejection, it's probably a projection of my own, but I wonder if the fear for women is being taken from. And you can just imagine those 2 fears playing out together. If you're fearing that I'm going to reject you, and I'm fearing our intimacy or sex is actually taking something from me, it's they're going to hit up against each other pretty strong. So I know that I can't speak for all of women, but my fear in intimacy is around, being taken from. Also a bit of performance anxiety, I'm not wet enough yet, I'm not ready yet, it's taking too long, which I would say there's a fear, it's almost fear-based. And when I'm in that kind of train of thinking, or even just the word thinking gives it away, I'm in my head and I'm not actually available for pleasure. So of course I'm a no to it.
I think maybe another thing that sort of can creep in over time, if there's unexpressed hurts, or say there's instances where a connection is happening or intimacy is happening, and then something happens where maybe the guy can't stay hard or the woman starts to feel like not aroused anymore, and there needs to be something different happening. There can be shame, you know, which is like self-inflicted, as in like I feel shame about myself, or it's, you know, and I think that's usually how it mainly shows up, is like, yeah, so there's some type of like upset and shame and like pain around trying to be intimate, or even just having like desires that you're unwilling to share with your partner, which to me falls under the vulnerability piece of like, there's actually things I want to do, but I don't know how to broach the topic with you. So we keep having sex that's like
not hitting the mark.
Not hitting the mark, you know, but I have too much shame to share, or, you know, there's things that I want to do that I feel like, or I project onto you that you would never do, you know?
I think there are lots of blocks for people in the way of them having like ecstatic sex and intimacy. And it's like getting courageous to like look and be honest with what might not be working, what you want to explore, being brave enough to have the conversation, to self-reveal with your partner, and just like really get honest about it. And it's, yeah, I guess a lot of people have negative stories or trauma around sex, and it just keeps us small, and it's such a shame.
Yeah, and I think it's like, you know, there's a part of me that just, you know, as therapists, that we, you know, we work with people every day around, and especially in relationship, around these like blocks that can be cleared. They don't have to stay here forever.
No,
you
like,
know?
I honestly never thought pleasure would be my story. Never. It was just, I had
Number two value?
It did become a high. Once, like when I first discovered pleasure, it became a very high value of mine. But for a long time, it was just like I had fear that it wasn't possible for me, because it just never, I didn't have a reference for it.
And when you did have it, then there was a fear of losing it.
Oh yeah, like absolutely. Isn't that interesting? It's like attachment is the root of all suffering, because inherent in attachment is like the clinging to it, and like the fear, like, yeah.
I think of it like the slippery fish. Like the harder you squeeze on it, the more it goes rip and flies out of your hands. So it's the same.
I think the antidote here really is like its presence and its vulnerability to just have these conversations and be open to the exploration. Self-pleasure, exploration with partner, and just not taking it all so personally, you know?
Very hard to not do when you're in relationship, because it feels like the other one is. That's what I had a conversation with someone last night about, that around, we take our partners personally because they're reflecting back our stuff, you know, and it's easy to put it on them, like it's their fault or they've done it, or they're the reason why I can't be ecstatic in my pleasure or in my love making. But it's like, if you're in relationship with someone right now and there's like a desire to explore, it's like, what an amazing opportunity to be able to be really vulnerable with that person and really like develop something that can be such a beautiful thing. And again, it comes to that piece of like the big triangle that I create, where the base is agreements, and then it's boundaries on top, and then it's like the intimacy and the, you know, which can be sex and love and all those things, and love on top. So it's like, yeah, really cultivating that together. It's really beautiful. Does it feel like it? Does it feel like there's anything more that we want to touch upon on this topic?
I don't think so. The only thing that I would add at this point is, if you are in relationship or if your experience with sex is mediocre, know that it does not have to be, and you can heal trauma in the body. You can heal blocks to eros and arousal.
Yeah.
You can create turn on. If you feel responsive in your desire, that is not a fault. It is just a different, it's different. And once you learn about your body, like, so much is possible. And just please take that from a woman who absolutely despised sex and intimacy for over a decade. It gets to be different, it gets to be amazing, it gets to change your life, it gets to be all the things, you know? So I really want that for women who are like just really disheartened with their experience.
Yeah, and I think for the men that are, say, struggling to engage with their partner in a way that feels amazing for both, is like, how can we come back to vulnerability and play with our partners and with ourselves, like our own self-exploration around pleasure, and not just masturbation, but like mindful, you know, pleasure in the body, in all the ways, and, you know, creating this to be an extension of your relationship that just gets to thrive. So
sounds good.
All right, well,
thank you guys for joining us. You know where to find us. I am Charlie S. Hannah on Instagram.
And I'm Linzey B on Instagram.
And we are Embodied Union on Instagram, and we are in transit right now to Bali, to Australia, but when we're back in mid-July, our doors are open for men and women and couples who really want to do this work. So if that's you, just please reach out.
Yep, and the Embodied Leadership Masterclass is coming up. So if you're interested in that, then I would love to have all the men that are listening to this podcast come and join me on that. And on the 18th of July, the Embodied Man Mentorship starts. It's an 8-week journey for men. So if you're interested, I would love to have a conversation with you.
It gets to be different.
It gets to be good. And what have you got coming up?
I've got the Embodied Love Masterclass next Tuesday. It's for women, speaking into the trifecta, which I believe creates epic experience. So internal work, relationship skills, and authentic intimacy. It's a free masterclass.
Great.
And then I have the next round of the Embodied Woman starting in August.
Okay, so there's a bit of time.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for tuning in and checking in.
Love you.
Love you, critter. See you guys next week.